Hi guys, I'm Shmee, hello and welcome back to the channel where today is my first drive in a BMW M, a car with quite a personal story that I shall explain in just a moment. Now today is a first for me, a first time ever filming a car collection across multiple continents. We're here at the Swiss section of the global car collection with the most extraordinary of lineups, but you're going to have to stay tuned to see more of that when I visit the other locations a little bit down the line. Today, however, is all about this, the E92 Series M Coupe. Now, there's a bit of a backstory here. My first ever car was a 2005 Renault Clio 1.2, and I recently purchased the ultimate flagship version in the form of the Clio V6 Phase 2, which we've completely redone. My second ever car that I owned in the UK was an E82 123D Series Coupe, and this is the flagship version of that car. In many ways, the spiritual successor to some of the earlier M3 generations, the 1 Series dialed up to the max with a manual gearbox, the flared out wide arches, 335 brake horsepower, 3-litre turbo straight six, and a car that, until this date, for some reason, I've never previously driven. So thanks to the global car collection, today is an opportunity to find out whether this is one that is going to be in the pipeline for my collection. Perhaps next. Let's get out there and find out. The idea with this car, the BMW Series M Coupe, or more often known as just the BMW M, was for BMW's M division to take the smallest platform available, nicknamed the Baby-BMW, the newly introduced 1 Series, which in 2007 had spawned the two-door coupe variant, and then to shoehorn in elements of its bigger brother, the E92 M3, the V8 generation M3, although this is based on the N54 straight six that we'll get more to later, to create a car that met their tagline at the time, the joy of driving, and that's what I want to experience. Now, the original intention was that they would produce about 2,500 to 3,000 of them, but demand vastly outweighed supply. They went on to make about 6,000 cars in total. They cost at the time about £40,000. A good low mileage, perfect condition car is now worth about double that. That's how high the demand still is for the car that was introduced back in 2011. Now, this particular example is presented in Valencia orange, this metallic orange paint, which was actually the launch colour for the car, with the new 19-inch silver wheels that we have, the carbon fibre lip spoiler and plenty more elements around it. But it's a recipe which is everything you want. I mean, just look at these arches. It's about 7 or 8 centimetres wider than standard. Look at the way the bodywork comes out to wrap around the wider track. It's rear driven, 335 brake horsepower with a 6-speed manual gearbox. Everything on paper is lightweight, is a little bit more focused, is more about what the driver wants from their car. At the back here, we've got the signature M tailpipes, the twin pipes on either side, everything you expect from an M car. And this is really where the pressure, I suppose, piled on to the 1M as this successor to the E30, E36, E46, M3 generations, those cars that were always about the driver. They were always about the drive. This, though, having owned the regular 1 Series Coupe, we could say, when I look at it and I see how much wider it is all around, and I see these extra flared out intakes and sections around the front, it just ticks so many boxes. Now, I do want to pop open the bonnet quickly, so let me come around and just get this opened up. The interior is nothing too much to write home about because it's basically a 1 Series, a pretty regular 1 Series. Let me see if I can figure this. But up front, they took the 135i engine, the N54, 3-litre turbo straight six. It is turbocharged, we'll talk about that when we're driving. Bumped it up to 335 horsepower, and obviously squeezed everything that they needed into this package up front in the 1M. It sounds better than the regular car. I don't actually think I've ever even driven a 135i to this point, but my 123D I had bought because I was driving a lot at the time across France. I wanted the economy, the mileage economy for long distance slogs, and I actually did in a year and a half about 30,000 miles with that car, so a fair bit of driving, and I'm very familiar with the seating position, with the shape, with the feel. But at the time, or slightly after the time perhaps I should say, I often wondered if I should have spent the same money on the 125i, which would have been about the same as a petrol head. But this is the ultimate, and I tell you what, if one came up based on what I know right now that needed a little bit of work like our Clio V6, it could be really tempting. What I need to find out though is whether it lives up to my expectations. And to do that, we need to get it started and we need to head out for a nice drive. Inside here then, let me show you around. Actually, firstly, foot on the clutch and the brake, hit the button. It has a great rasp, really like that sound. And then of course, this 6-speed manual shifter. It was only available as a manual, unlike say the 135, which was either an auto or a manual gearbox. But that's a big part of what it's about. This car's pretty low mileage, so it's very kind of the Global Car Collection to allow me to take it for a drive. This all feels so familiar, even down to the storage box up on the top of the dash. You could opt to have a nav system, but obviously the very early days of iDrive, especially in a 1 Series, yeah, feels good. You've got some nice orange stitching all around the dash and the Alcantara trim. A few, let's say, lightweight bits and bobs around us, but still with the rear seats. Still a usable car, still a BMW, still a 1 Series, but a 1 Series for the drivers. So let's go find out then on the roads what it's like. First impressions of the 1M are good, very, very good. But before we get too much into what this car is like to drive, I want to tell you a bit of a funny story about the car that I originally bought back in 2008, as it happens. So when I first test drove a 1 Series Coupe, I was deciding whether to upgrade from the base 120D SE to either the 120D M Sport or the 123D SE, both obviously diesel engines, 2-litre turbocharged diesel engines. But I test drove a 120D M Sport, and I mention it because it had the exact same seats that this car has, and I found them far too snug because I didn't know, and neither did the salesman at the time know, that there is actually an electronic switch to adjust the side bolsters to make them a bit more comfortable. So in another world, I might actually have ended up buying a 120D M Sport. But anyway, here we are. I had the 123D SE. I did go on to buy some bigger wheels for it, did a few other changes, like installing a Bluetooth system, because I didn't order that from new. I thought the option was a little too expensive for me at the time. But anyway, had that car for quite a good amount of time, did lots and lots of miles with it, and getting into here feels instantly familiar. Obviously my 1 Series was right-hand drive and this car is left-hand drive because we're on the continent, but I had a manual. The shifter feels the same. Obviously it's with the other hand, but you get used to these kind of things. It just feels brilliant, and I think arguably one of the greatest modern era BMWs. The idea behind this was obviously to make something that spiritually would feel like those earlier M3s, which were always the smallest model. Obviously cars have grown in time. The M3 got significantly bigger for the E92 generation, and then obviously from then on it has grown and grown much more into, let's say, 5 Series territory, with all of the tech, with all of the comfort, and with even the feel when you're driving it, whereas this just feels a little bit more boisterous, a little bit more engaging. And you know, as we go up these mountain passes, even there, obviously I've got traction fully on, a small little bump and it's trying to light up because all of that power is going straight to the back, and there's plenty of it for a small little car like this. It's basically the perfect place to come and drive something of this kind of nature. Quite small, easy to position, short front end as we meander up through the trees towards the sunshine again. The traction is very invasive because it's constantly trying to slip and just bump around a little bit underneath me, but it goes up through the gears so nicely. And the sound as well, it might not be the loudest thing in the world with the stock exhaust system, sorry, I should say, but the little bit of sound that you do get is a tone that the modern engines just can't match. I vastly prefer this to my more recent G80 M3 in terms of the pitch and quality of the sound. Even from the cold start, it lets you know straight away, and the precision and the way it feels is beautiful. Again, it's lighting up. So the long story short with that is that this would be a very tail happy car if you press the traction off button. Now I've been driving it with the sport mode engaged, which is the M button on the steering wheel, but all that does is change the throttle mapping, and it changes it quite dramatically. So when you're on the throttle and you press M, it just lurches forwards a bit because obviously it suddenly tries to give a whole load more. But when you're driving normally, it's also quite peaceful and civilized. But this to me is, let's say, a bit of a personal connection. Obviously there's a huge thing right now with the rise of these more recent collectible cars, stuff that can't really be repeated, and arguably that is heavily skewed towards naturally aspirated engines, and the turbocharged nature of the engine inside here is certainly a topic of discussion on that front. You do know that it's turbo. It doesn't obviously feel like some of the latest eras of these kind of things, you know, waiting for it, there we go, away it goes. There's that small kind of pause before it delivers. And I know a lot of people at the time thought this was basically kind of parts bin special, just pulling things together for it. But when you thread it down a road like this, it doesn't feel like something that was just botched together. It feels like the wizards at BMW M knew exactly what they were doing and put something together that we were going to enjoy for years and years to come. And it's only just over a decade old now, this car. It's been about 10 years since it was introduced to the market. But on some smoother tarmac here, just opening up the throttle up through the revs a little bit, enjoying the manual gearbox, rowing through the gears a little bit more than perhaps I need to, but just having fun with it on this short drive thanks to the Global Car Collection, which is really a collection that's about cars like this. Cars from all sorts of different generations. The most special and exclusive things that we need to remember that we should be enjoying. And gosh, this is really selling me on the BMW 1M. I can see why the values have done what they've done. And it's such a car from an era. Now, my 123D was Alpine White, a colour that BMW actually still offer through to all the modern models as well now, even though we're 14 or so years on. And maybe one of these in Alpine White is what I should be looking for, something like that, or the signature Valencia Orange, or who knows. Obviously, it's a topic I discussed recently with selling some of those bigger cars from the garage, selling some of the cars that come with much higher price tags to make some space to try more of these kind of things, to enjoy more different types of motoring. It doesn't necessarily need to be a top trumps game with the most power, the most expensive, the biggest, the fastest, this, that and the other. There's so much more to driving, to having an emotional connection with a car, and that's why I love cars like this. Just absolutely love them. Perhaps inside it's a bit plain. Yes, it's a 1 Series, but it's not about that. And you know, when you're at the wheel and when you're driving down a twisty road like this, surrounded by this kind of scenery, you don't really care about the inside because it's you, the steering wheel, and you know, I'd like one that's got a slightly less chunky grip. I often say that about the modern BMWs. I feel exactly the same about a BMW from 11 years ago as well. It's a little bit too chunky for my liking, but that's something that's easy enough to change and swap out if you buy one of these as well. You can obviously fix up anything inside on one that isn't perfect either. So we come, I think, probably around some of these tighter corners with some roadworks or something ahead of us, but yeah. What a great place to be driving this. Having just turned around on a bit of road with some pretty loose gravel, I can tell you the rear end does not like to stick and control. And even though it's a pretty warm day out, obviously the tarmac is plenty grippy, the tail of this is very, very happy to brake. Now, if I pop it back into sport, and obviously you get that instant lurch because I was slightly on the throttle, there is a very convenient button in the center of the dashboard. If you press ESC off once, it puts it into MDM, which is M dynamic mode, which gives you a touch more slip. If you hold the button down, it turns it fully off, although I'm not sure I would want to do that right now. But this is where we'll be able to have a little bit more fun, unleash it ever so slightly more. And the car feels so poised. It feels really refined as well. Very Porsche-esque in many ways. As we go back down the hill here, down the smooth tarmac, but flanked by the trees. Obviously you don't want to take too many chances with things. Just dropping it down through the gears. You know, there's no auto rev matching or anything like that going on. It's just you and the car here. Back on the power. It feels brilliant, and it's amazing actually that 335 horsepower gets you on the move so quickly as it does in this, because I'm used to significantly more powerful cars. The only difference obviously is that things more modern than this are getting so heavy so quickly, whereas this managed to keep the weight down, being based on a platform just back in the early 2000s periods. Right, this road meanders completely back and forth, lots of concentration as we go through here. God, I love that second to third feeling in this. It's super connected. The short wheelbase to it, but obviously the wide track just makes it feel very planted as well. As we go down here, obviously lots of both motorbikes and cyclists out enjoying this road as well, so I have to keep eyes out around each corner. But this is a great place with that kind of view to be experiencing the BMW 1M for the first time, and it really is To say it again, one of the best modern BMWs. Really and truly. This is a wonderful car. And I think it might be quite hard to resist at some point before long. Loving it. You know, there is quite a cult following behind the BMW 1M, and I think that's because there hasn't really been anything exactly like this since. Let me explain what I mean. The M3 at the time was with the V8. It was a bigger, all-round, more beastly monster. Since then, we've had 2 generations of M3, but they've kind of grown up. Like I've said, they've kind of become more like 5 Series, if I can say. Obviously, the M2 stepped in, and the M2 competition, and you could have those with manual boxes. And we've had the M2 CS, which is an unbelievably good car, but they're not quite the same as this limited but really driver-focused feel that this car offers, and that's something so special, especially now as we look for cars like this. More and more people want to enjoy the last of whatever it was, the last opportunities to have that kind of driving experience. So the demand for these is huge, despite the fact that they made many more of them than they thought. And even Seb, who works with the Shmeemobile team, actually has one as well that's appeared on the channel a little bit in the past, also in the same colour as this. But it's a car that, to me, is one I'm very glad to have driven. They often say don't meet your heroes, just in case, but I'm glad to have driven this because honestly, it's great. It sounds good, it feels good, and I am now very, very keen. So let's see, I'm not going to jump into it right now, but certainly one to look for down the line to add to the collection. It rides really well over the bumps, even there with MDM. We have a little bit of slip, but it generally drives really nicely. There's no electronic adjustment to all that much. You just kind of step in, off you go, let the car do its thing, and it does it in an all-round brilliant way. I'm very, 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 very pleased to have driven this today because, I don't know, it was one of those I've always kind of wondered what it's like, and now I know. It really is very Porsche-esque in the way you shift through the gears. Very different in my mind to, say, the new M3, M4, if you drive a manual one of those. It's very different to that. Just feels like a smaller, more nimble, more agile, snappier little thing. But exactly what I like from a car. Exactly what I like from a car. Back at base, and what a spectacular view with the 1M glistening in the sunshine. One of the cars from the global car collection. You've seen a snippet of some, but there's more to see here and elsewhere, so stay tuned for all of that. But let's touch on this, the 1 Series M Coupe car that back at the time many thought should have been the M1. Of course, we have the M3, M4, M5, M6, etc. But the previous M1 was BMW's supercar. This is clearly not a supercar, but it is exactly what an M car should be. It's distinctly M. The size of those arches, with a light just disappearing behind a cloud, but the way they reflect the light off them, all of the distinct M features, the M badging, the carbon lip spoiler, the quad exhaust tailpipes, the M mirrors, you name it, all of those details that instantly make it visually an M. And yes, there have been cars since that offer similar kind of driving, but not in the same way that this did. And I just want to quickly show inside here, that button that I mentioned on the seats, that button there is the one that my salesman at the time didn't know about, which might have changed what I went for. Maybe I would have had a 120D M Sport instead of a 123D SE. I don't know, either way. Small moot point. Either way, driving this today has been so much fun to meet one of my heroes, to meet a car that has actually fully lived up to what I hoped it would. And obviously, having now gone from the original Clio through to my Clio V6 that we've fully gone through, it would be so fun as well to go from my original Diesel 1 Series to the ultimate, the 1M, to maybe find a car that needs a little bit of work, that maybe we need to go through, overhaul, to personalize, to make it into something for myself, for my collection. And that's one of the fun things I guess I'm looking forward to a little bit more, with just shuffling things around a bit to enjoy some of these cars that we're not going to have forever. We might never see again. We don't really know. The move towards electric and all of that, and the general changes in attitudes and views towards emotional drivers' cars, and this ticks so many of those boxes. This car does it so very, very well. There have been some crazy projects people have done as well, engine swapping, V8s in here, all sorts of things. But straight out of the box, It's a very, very impressive car to drive, and I have enjoyed today an awful lot. So it's a huge thanks to the Global Car Collection for the opportunity to drive this today and to be able to share a small snippet of what's around with you. So like I said, do stay tuned for plenty more. For now though, that is all for today. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Do let me know your thoughts on the BMW 1M, whether one should join the collection at some point before too long. That's for now though, and I'll see you again very soon. Cheers.